issue should be dealt with, and I think that if it's possible, maybe he could say a few words about that as well. So thank you very much.
Thierry d'être ici avec nous.
Thanks, Thierry, for spending some time with us. The floor is yours. And after Thierry, we'll have two other speakers who are going to be introduced by Mr. Torreblanca.
Well, I will speak in English, if it's fine with you. Oh, English? English. Okay. No, that's fine. I'm sorry not to be able to speak in Spanish, but if it's fine, I'll speak in English. And first of all, of course, I would like to thank you, José, for inviting me here today. It's really a great pleasure for me to be at QUO VADIS Europa. So, of course, it's true that we work together with José Borrell in the Commission. We share a lot of common thought. We work in common also in defense, which is something new for the Commission and which is related also with technology. I will speak in a few minutes about it. But Joseph, it's true also that this event, QUO VADIS Europa, is becoming definitely a very important moment, let's say, in Europe, for all of us, to give us the direction where to go, to stop for a while, trying to understand what's happened around the world. It's your job, not an easy one. I always tell him it's the best job in the Commission, but it's the most difficult, believe me. Every time when we are our college, at the end, Joseph described the state of the world. It is the most interesting part and the most depressing. But still, so, a few words, of course. And we cannot speak about this subject. I don't like the title, by the way. Hegemony, I don't like hegemony. But we have to be realistic and not to be naive in our world. That's really what is important. And first, when we look at the geopolitical situation, and of course we need to look at the geopolitical situation because this will have, this has a huge impact on all of us. And it will, of course, increase in the years to come. And it's true that so many things have changed in the geopolitical landscape. You have spoken, Joseph, probably during the past 3 days, about the consequence of the Russian war in Ukraine, of course. But it started before. It started before with, let's say, the retreat from American troops from Afghanistan. It has been a big shock for us in Europe, let me tell you the truth, and changed a little bit the mindset, not a little bit, a lot of the mindset, of course, with everything which is happening in China. And you know that China is considered by us as being, let's say, systemic competitor. Hein? C'est comme ça qu'on dit, hein, Joseph, je crois. Un concurrent systémique. Competitor and partner too. Because of course, we need to work also with China, but we are not naive here. And we know what China is doing. I don't want to speak yet on what could happen in Taiwan. This may have a big impact on the semiconductors. I will speak in a few minutes about it when we will dig in the technological landscape. But look, if we see what happened over the past 3-4 years, a lot of crises, unexpected crises, of course, we had to cope with. And in fact, some even say that we are entering into a perma-crisis era. One crisis after each other. But we learned, and we reacted. Look what happened with the pandemic. Joseph just spoke about it. When we started, believe me, it was a nightmare. And you know that. and especially for us in Europe. At the end of the day, within less than 1 year, we became, for the vaccine, the pharmacy of the world. We became the first continent in terms of vaccine production. But because we have our values, and because I want to point something, we are, and that's important, the first democracy, the biggest democracy on this planet, Europe. Of course, we have India, let's put India apart, but today, with 445 million inhabitants, 1.5 more than in the United States, yes, we are the biggest democracy on this planet, based on rule of law, based on shared values. It's complex, it's difficult, it is not an easy journey, but it is our project. And it's working. And because of these values, we decided that we will keep half of the vaccines for us, and that we will send half of the vaccine produced in Europe outside to help other countries. It wasn't the case in the United States, you know that. And by the way, I discovered it myself, the hard way, with our best like-minded partner. When I have been in charge of the vaccine, you need between 400 to 500 components to make RNA vaccines. A lot of these components were manufactured in the US, in European factories belonging to European companies, but located in the US. And of course, the first day I've been assigned to this mission that José just mentioned, I called my counterpart, the EU chief vaccine, and I was the US chief vaccine. I said, look, Jeff Zients, you blocked some of my components. I need my components. And he said, oh, Thierry, sorry. We have now an obligation from the White House. We will not be able to send anything outside of the United States until we get herd immunity in the US. I said, look, it's our company. It's our plans. He said, no, sorry. So then, Joseph, you remember, we came to the college, we convinced our fellow commissioners to put the same thing. We will not send any components to countries who do not respect reciprocity. And then the following day, I said to Jeff Zients, sorry, Jeff, I will not be able to send you these components. And not here, it's impossible. I said, look, reopen the supply chain, and we'll become fine again. And this is what happened. Balance of power. We learned it the hard way. That's a good lesson for technology. Balance of power. We are entering into a world where we have a new geopolitics that I called, maybe you could give me a better name, the geopolitics of supply chain. Maintaining our supply chains open. That's a new way to see globalization. Globalization will continue, but we learn it the hard way. Even with your like-minded partner, you better know where you're strong to be able to establish the right balance of power, because in rainy days, you may need it. And remember, to build a bridge, you need solid pillars. And then, my job as a commissioner for internal market, for industry, and for tech, is to build solid pillar in Europe. Not to do everything, but to be able to exchange, to discuss, to create a balance of power. You mentioned that I've been a CEO. When I was a CEO, and of course there is nothing comparable to be a CEO or politician or commissioner. But when I was a CEO, I was always careful not to put all the eggs in the same basket in terms of supply. And also to know that I had some areas when I was very good, so I could bargain. So, nothing comparable, but still, lesson learned. The new geopolitics of supply chain, establishing balance of power to secure our supply. And by the way, second lesson learned through the vaccine crisis. We did this because of our values for the rest of the world, And we did this also with solidarity. Solidarity is the key word I think we need to keep for these introductory remarks. We did it together with all the member states. It was not easy at the beginning. We know that some member states were saying, oh, I want everything for me, including, you remember, for the mask. Huh? But then we realized that we will be able to do it because we are a continent. So solidarity is also the second key word that I want for you to keep in this discussion. Of course, if I move up, you remember Next Generation EU. We have been able then to take the decision for the first time in our history to borrow, to make sure that every single country will have the same access to financing and to be able to support the consequence of the crisis. It has not been an easy task, but we did it. We did it with solidarity. Third point, defense. That's a subject we are working a lot together with José. It's true that over the past 20 years, and we know that, and we say this, José and myself, Europe combined spending on defense increased only by 20%, when in the US it increased by 66%. And again, we are working continent per continent now. Nearly 300% for Russia and 600% for China. So we knew that we were lagging behind. But here again, and thanks to José's team and her personal involvement, we have been able for the first time in our history to put in place what we called a strategic compass. In other words, we know now, together, all together, where we need to go and where we want to go in terms of defense. Believe me, it has not been an easy journey, but we did it. We have now a vision. We know how to be aligned. Both, by the way, for innovation and spending together upfront. This is the defense fund for the first time, and this is in my responsibility. So José's responsibility was to align the vision of all the member states. Not easy, but we did it. And my responsibility is now, with the defense fund, to discuss with member states to have some specific program. Could be tanks for the future, could be drones for the future, could be frigate for the future, could be cyber security, could be in space, and invest upfront together. We have 7 billion, which will create 40 billion investment together, mutualize, again, to support this vision. But of course, also, nobody could have think that after this tragic war in Ukraine, that's for upfront, for downstream, we have been able to put now a proposal on the table, supported by the member states and in discussion with the Parliament, and it would be approved, I know, to buy together ammunitions and equipment, of course, because we gave, again, we decided together to give what was necessary to Ukraine to answer to their request. First time ever, including with some countries, like our friends from Germany. This has been a big move, but we did it together. But now also, we have also a tool to incentive, to buy together, to enhance our defense industry and recreate the stocks and the provisions that we need to have more ammunition for us and to continue to support the war in Ukraine and the request of Volodymyr Zelensky. So that's again something that changed a lot. Of course, if we see the crisis, we can continue energy. So here, we are not naive. We know that Putin doesn't like, and I'm polite, our European project. He doesn't like it. He wants to do, and he did, all efforts to divide us. Always. Remember what happened with this terrible use of migrants in Belarus, hybrid threat. Remember what he does in space. Remember what he does in fake news. Remember what he does in spreading wrong information to destroy our democracy or to play a role in our democracy. Cambridge Analytica, consequence on Brexit. Remember how he used Sputnik, Russian Today? Remember what he does in cybersecurity, cyber attacks? So we are not naive. And I could tell you also for the vaccine, believe me, he was trying to use Sputnik 5, trying to say to some of his, how should I phrase it, diplomatically, José, best friend or friends, Angela Merkel, others in Italy or others in Hungary. Stop Commissioner Breton with his vaccine. We have a fantastic Sputnik. Stop. And I received some call. Commissioner Breton. I will not tell you who called me. Huh? Maybe it will be a good idea to see if Sputnik could work. So we know how he tried to divide us. And here again, after February 24th, we all knew that he will use our dependencies to Russia against us. So here, with my team, we worked immediately on the main dependency, which was, of course, I will let apart raw materials, I will let apart some mining industry and stuff like this that we will be able to replace when we are the other. But of course, the biggest part was gas. Coal, fuel, but the biggest part was gas, because gas is difficult to replace. Coal you can, fuel you can, but gas, you need infrastructure, you need pipelines. So we worked, I wanted you to know, since day one, and you know this because we mentioned this many times in the college, José. We worked to have a plan to replace the 155 BCM, in other words, billions of cubic meter of gas that we import collectively from Russia to Europe, because we said he will use this dependency. And he did. Remember, he started with Poland, boom, shut down. Then with Bulgaria, shut down. Then he did it with the Baltic country, the three Baltic countries. Then he did it with Finland. Then he did it with Netherlands. Then he reduced down to 20% Germany. So we know that he's playing with it. So what we did is two things. First, under José's leadership and with his colleague, we put some sanctions, first against the people, of course, Putin, his entourage, the oligarchs, and of course, we don't want to see these people to come in the summertime on their yacht on the French Riviera. We have our values, so we put some sanctions. But also, we tried to decouple us. And remember this name. I prefer this name personally, at least in my field. Decoupling our dependencies, at least for the time being, during this war. So, of course, we did it for coal. I think it was mid-August. We did it for fuel, but again, we have to protect our interests too. So we did it smoothly till this end of the year, and we replace. But we didn't do it for gas, because our interest is to continue to fill up our strategic reserve from gas. But he's using it. So, one word on how I see this evolution. Remember, for us to be able to pass the winter and to be prepared for the next one, we need to see how we will be able to substitute these dependencies with other sources. And then we built a huge plan that we exchange now with every single member state. And I want to give you some ideas of what is this plan about, because you asked me to speak about it. So we have three criteria that I think it's important to have in mind. Substitution, solidarity, and sobriety. But here again, we are talking only on gas, which represents 10% of everything that we consume for our energy supply in Europe. So it's not 90%, huh? Remember the figures. I don't want to minimize it, but I just want to give you the figures. But still, it's important because some countries are more dependent than others, of course. And of course, we will have coal this winter. We will have fuel this winter. We will have kerosene this winter. We will have electricity this winter. The problem is gas. Or, if it's electricity produced by gas. So substitution first. So we use alternative sourcing. At least 50, so remember, we import 155 billion. 50 now are already secured from LNG, moving from gas, from Russian supply to LNG, mainly from the United States and Qatar. We can go probably up to 64. Then we have pipeline diversification from other parts of the world, south, east. That's another 14 BCM, notably from Norway, from gas production in Italy, Romania, Netherlands. We have also then biogas, biomethane across Europe, another 8 BCM. We are pushing very strongly because our vision, our strategy is and will remain the Green Deal. That's extremely important. We not derive 2050, zero CO2. But we need to pass these few months ahead of us. And here, of course, we will accelerate as much as we can, and we are pushing with all countries to accelerate the permits and everything to have more, let's say, green and renewable energy sources, and that's another 12 BCM that we can do. And finally, we have a lot of energy, of industry using gas. Some could use oil. So we are now discussing energy by energy, ecosystem by ecosystems, companies per companies, to see how they could replace momentarily gas per fuel, and that's another 34 BCM. I give these figures. Behind, you have a lot of course, discussions, projects going on, but at least we have the vision. That's for the substitution part. Then we are entering into the solidarity part. Solidarity means that we decided collectively that it will be good to enter winter with 80% of our strategic reserves of gas full up. Last year it was 60%. So today, I will give you the figures from yesterday evening. At the EU, we are at 76.92, almost 77, so almost 80. So we're already here. We still have 2 more months. For the EU, give you some example. France is at 90%. Germany is at 80%. Italy is important also because depending of Russian gas, you know, 79%. Spain, 82%. But of course, we will continue to do it. I know that Germany would like to go maybe to 95%. It will be a challenge, but at least we will be at the goal that we decided it will be fair to go 80% there. And of course then, we need to have solidarity with our strategic reserves to help countries where it will be needed. I know it's a challenge, but this is again how we will be able to overcome together the situation. And of course we do this also with electricity, and we will do it of course now with gas. And the last S, the 3 S's, substitution, solidarity, sobriety. Of course we need to make sure that we will be more sober in energy consumption, which is good also for our Green Deal, but mainly of course for gas, because this is what we miss, and electricity. So here we have 4 BCM coming from renovating buildings. We have 10 BCMs by reducing, maybe 1-2 degrees. Some would like maybe to do 3 degrees. The temperature, somewhere at 22, maybe they will be at 20 or 19. That's another 10 BCM. That's a lot. And of course, avoiding wasted energy in administration and service sectors. Don't let the door open when you have the air conditioning or stuff like this. That's another 10 BCM. When you add all this, you are a little bit above 155. So we have a plan, José. It's a challenge, it's difficult. I don't know if we will be able to overcome, but when we started the problem that we had to face and to cope with our vaccine, we did not know, but we did it. We did it. So I'm confident that we will do it again, even if it's a challenge. But what is important is that we have a plan together. So now, few words on technology. I was a bit too long on energy, but it's important to speak about this. Of course, now, but I draw a little bit the picture. We are now in a world where what counts is continent. I mean, and this is why we are so sad for what happened with our British friends. Because, of course, you can count on this planet because you are a continent. And you know this better than everyone, of course. And it's true, of course, for all our industry, in my job. It's true for our digital policy and position. One word, for example, we have few things that if I want to speak on digital and digital technologies, but you will speak, of course, later on and better than me. Digital, semiconductors and over, space, quantum technologies. I mean, in everything which will be key for us, and especially for our industry, what is extremely important is, of course, everybody knows that, but I want to repeat it, is data. Data is what counts in, of course, this digital transformation. What means digital transformation? Means playing, moving, creating values with data. So the way we create data is important. The way we store data is important. The way we exchange data is important. The way we understand what belongs to me, what belongs to the community is important. And this is exactly what we did since day one in the Commission, starting from our mandate, saying, look, when we speak about technology or digital technology, let's focus first on data. How do you produce data? We know, of course, on the edge, now with 5G networks, beyond 5G, 6G, and so on, we know that, of course, you need, in order to do this, you need what? Semiconductors. Because this is, of course, how you will be able to produce data, to store data, to interact, to add the software, to be able to react on real time. So then, of course, we know that semiconductors are extremely important. Extremely important. There is not one single industry without semiconductors. But where these semiconductors are produced now? It's our fault. 25 years ago, we were producing 40% of the global needs in Europe. Now, less than 10%. By the way, same thing for United States. We all went to Asia, and I was a CEO. I did it myself too, when I was the chairman and CEO of Thomson and RCA. I put my factories between Shenzhen and Guangzhou, like everyone. Like everyone. And if you didn't do this, the market will kill you. Said, oh, you need to do this because, of course, it's cheap and so on. But look, now, our dependencies are huge. But we kept very strong R&D in Europe. Thanks to the Commission, thanks to our strengths, thanks to our skills, we have the best R&D centers in Europe, especially IMEC, that you know, but also Leti, but also Fraunhofer Institute, Leti in Grenoble, IMEC near Brussels, IMEC mainly for FinFET technologies, Leti mainly for FDSOI technologies, Fraunhofer Institute for packaging. So, and by the way, every single semiconductor company sends their engineers in our R&D labs. Believe it or not, TSMC, Samsung, Intel. When you go to IMEC or you go to Grenoble, you see these nationalities. So we kept this, but we lost the control of the manufacturing. And again here, we don't intend to do everything on our own. But again, I said at the beginning, build the pillar. We need to be able also to have some manufacturing capacity in Europe, and also because the proximity of R&D and manufacturing in semiconductors is extremely important. So we worked on a EU Chip Act, like with our US friends worked on the US Chip Act, putting 42 billion euros on the table, and with a goal to double the capacity to produce our own semiconductors in Europe by the end of this decade. And it's done. And by the way, we had the first very huge project announced in Grenoble at the beginning of July. Another one announced near Berlin with Intel, huge factory. It's working. It's important because, you know, today 50% of the production, roughly, of the key semiconductors are done where? Taiwan. And of course, we know that if something happened, but that's, you're the expert, huh? Maybe I read that in newspapers that sometimes they said something could happen in Taiwan or around Taiwan. That's why we have to be very careful when we go to Taiwan. Around Taiwan. Because if Taiwan is blocked, let's say, if there is a lockdown, within probably 3-4 weeks, no more semiconductors, look what will happen in our factories. So for this, we did it the right way. And again, it has nothing to do with sovereignty, with autonomy. It's just, again, to rebalance, and to create the right balance of power. Imagine that. I read sometimes that we lost all the battles in technology in Europe. It's wrong. It is wrong. Today, Europe controls 95% of the huge robots that you put in a semiconductor factory to make EIU semiconductors, the most advanced semiconductors, below 10 nanometers. 95%. The company is called ASML. It is in Netherlands. It's the second biggest market cap in Europe. 1.5 bigger market cap than Intel. It's European. We are not only selling food, wine, or cheese, you said, or maybe fashion. No, we are also very, very good in the most advanced technology. But again, here, it may be helpful, one day or the other, to create the right balance of power. Remember something, China needs us. We need China. That's a very strong commercial partner. But they need our internal market. Without exporting their goods, and they have a lot of goods to export. Their own internal market is too weak to provide enough jobs for everyone. And we know that if China grows below 6%, there's immediately a social consequence. How will it be today? We have probably some economists in the room. In China, 2%, 1%, 3%, definitely below 6%. And by the way, I think the 20th Congress may be a little bit more shaky than some think, because China is struggling, not only because of the COVID restriction, but also because, again, today, they don't export enough. China needs us. So again, balance of power, using the internal market as a tool in our discussions. Open, yes, we continue to be an open continent, but with some conditions, just respecting who we are and where our interest. Few words to finalize. I see that José is starting to get nervous. A few words in terms of technology. Data. We have the data spaces. We have the cloud initiative. We have the industrial data initiative. We want to do this on our own. We invite, of course, all our international partners, but it's very important to know exactly for us what we want, where it is extremely strategic, where we can invite others, and we did all this job. Something for quantum. Quantum will be the next frontier. Quantum technologies will be extremely, extremely important, not only in computing. Of course, we are already working in computing, but we know that when we will start to see the first quantum accelerators and then quantum computers, they will be able to break the RSA code that support the security of the whole internet networks. So we need to be prepared for this next generation, and we do it. And we have already the Quantum Manifesto. It was in the previous commission. We continue to enhance this. That's extremely important. We have the skills. We have the project. We want also to use quantum in space because it is a smart way to use entanglement, to be able to protect secure communication networks, but then we need, of course, a low orbit satellite constellation. We have this project of low orbit satellite constellation. We can use also quantum technologies to see underground with gravinometry. So we have many, many things here. And I just wanted to mention this en passant. But it's important, again, here to continue to invest. Again, not to do everything on our own, but to be able to be an equal partner. Remember, in partnerships, you need to bring something to others. If you don't bring something, you're totally dependent. Russia, gas, Europe. We cannot do this. Final point on new space, I could speak also on space, access to space and so on, but if you have any questions, I don't want to be too long. Next topic, of course, in green tech. In green technologies, of course, that's extremely important. We know that it will be also another next frontier. We have huge programs to do this, but here again, we have a tool on this. We have an IPCI for hydrogen, which is extremely important. We have a 80 project, which will be extremely important. But of course, we know also that for all of this, for the windmills, for the battery, we have a very strong IPCI for batteries with 20 megafabs now in Europe. 4 years ago, it was 0. So we are moving fast. But for batteries, you need lithium. You need all these components. Today, everything is refined in China. Not produced, but refined in China. So we need probably to have also some refineries in Europe, again, to be able to rebalance it. We have also the same strategy for permanent magnet in windmills. So we have a full map of what is needed, what we can do in Europe also. This is something I would like to draw your attention on. In terms of technology, you need critical materials. You need, of course, circularity, which is extremely important, circular economy to recycle. But you need also mining, and you need components. So we will not be able to live always saying, we want to do the mining with other countries, it's dirty, but for us, we just buy, and please give us what we need. So it will not work this way in the new world. So we made a very in-depth mapping of every resource that we have in Europe. We have a lot of resources, but it's true that because of our values, first democracy, we need to do it respecting our values. Environment, biodiversity, local cities, people, and we know how to do this, and using what? Technology. So here again, you will see the Commission pushing a Raw Material Act, being able to let's say, protect us here, but also to do what we have to do in Europe. Again, not to do everything, but to be able to have some key resources here to be able to discuss and bargain on an equal basis. So that's basically what I wanted to say as an introduction. The Commission is at work. We are not naive. We know where we are strong. We know where we are weak. We know what we have to catch up to be stronger. But I think, José, we learn solidarity, which is extremely important. We have to understand what it means to be the first democracy in the free world. It gives us a lot of responsibility, and it's not easy. And we have to understand also what it means to be seen by others as a power on its way. And that's something that we need to understand as Europeans. We are a power. We are seen, maybe by the way, by Putin, and he's right, as a power. Maybe by Erdogan, as a power. By the way, and unfortunately, maybe by our British friends, as a power. We hope, by the way, that they may come back one day. But this is something that we have to learn, because this is how we will build our future relations with all our partners. Thank you very much.
Merci Thierry pour tout.
Thank you so much, Thierry.
once in a while we need to have a positive and optimistic view of Europe. So thank you for your words. Sometimes we're too self-critic, and we need to value what we do, as Thierry has done today, to explain what is happening in Europe nowadays. Look at everything we do and what our capacities are. I would like to highlight one of the things that you've said. We shouldn't do absolutely everything. We cannot be autarkic. We cannot be self-sufficient in absolutely everything, but we need to avoid excessive dependencies. We cannot delegate in others everything. We can't either do absolutely everything, nor others do everything for us. When the pandemic got here, we discovered we didn't have a gram of paracetamol being manufactured in Europe. Was when we realized that excessive dependencies were dangerous. That it's very good for the pharmaceutical industry in the rest of the world to supply us, but not to these extremes. And the new dependencies, the ones that will come with new technologies, we won't be depending on gas and coal, but where will we get lithium and other minerals that are needed for example, cell phones? What are the new dependencies is when we need to look at and avoid. So thank you so much, Thierry. Thank you so much for giving us this optimistic view regarding energy issues. There's a lot of pessimistic people saying we won't have gas this winter and it's going to be horrible.
Nos ha echado las cuentas y nos ha explicado.
But Thierry has shown that we have options and that apocalyptic visions are very interesting for headlines in the media. To be able to feed national discussions, but it's also important to give value to what we are doing. So now let's go on, José Ignacio, to the panel session. After the framework provided by Thierry, I will you be doing from there, or should I leave the table? Okay, then you have the floor. Thank you so much. We're going to start with the second part of this very interesting session. I would like to thank Commissioner Breton for his introductory words to this issue. According to your personal experience, there's a key element to the problem that we face. As you've explained, when you were CEO of Thomson, you had to bring your factories to China, and if you didn't so, then the market would punish you. Because we were living in an open globalization where we didn't care what was manufactured where, if you were able to give it at a reasonable price and in time to the consumer. So technology wasn't discussed, but it was shared welfare asset. But this world has ended. Technology, like all other interdependency elements, becomes something we fight for and something that can be used to change foreign policies, to change your values and democratic systems. And this is the system and the context that we live in. Fortunately, the EU for some time now has tried to change the way in which it does things, to stop being just a regulatory superpower, people that just passes acts, to become a geopolitical agent. And we've seen in the last years how there have been many initiatives, like the Commissioner mentioned, that shows that we want to have a main role. We don't want to just be there, but we want to have something to say in this global field. We have the Trade and Technology Council with the US, which is a good example, a perspective of the global gateway started by the Commission, and the CHIPS Act, as all the other regulations regarding data and so on and so forth. Therefore, we're in the right path. The Commission passed in 2020 a very ambitious program for digital partnerships in its digital decade, and it's developing this partnerships. There's also going to be a digital alliance with Latin America, a fundamental area regarding rare earths, and that is very important to be part of this new industrial revolution. So it's important in this discussion to have two perspectives, that of Marie Engtoft and Tyson Barker. And Marie Engtoft is Denmark's tech ambassador with responsibility for representing the Danish government to the global tech industry. She spends half her year in Silicon Valley and the other half in theory in Copenhagen, but probably in the rest of the world too. She comes from the World Economic Forum, and she's a person that in the World Economic Forum was heading the fourth industrial revolution issues, and that's why she works on innovation in Danish diplomacy. The Danish government has put forward the strategy for internationalization of digital issues for Europe, having a leading role last year in the Foreign Affairs Council, and all member states signed this to ask the High Representative and the Commission to develop a digital strategy. And this strategy was passed in the last council on the 18th of July 2022. Therefore, as Commissioner Breton and High Representative Borrell said, we can be optimistic regarding what is being done. And Tyson Barker is here because he can also give us a view from academia and politics, a very interesting viewpoint. He's from the U.S. and has been living in Germany for many years now. He's had responsibilities in this State of Department as senior advisor in the Department for European Affairs. He has also been director for the digital program Aspen, and now he works, as I said, in Germany. And you can follow him through his foreign affairs, political, Atlantic and foreign policy. So I wanted to open this discussion with them so that they can give us a reaction to what Commissioner Breton just said, and also ask, first of all, Anne-Marie, what is your view on the digital and technology global agenda of the EU? What is the situation nowadays? What is lacking? What are the gaps? And we've heard about the contribution of the Commission. What do you believe is the contribution that member states should make? What is the role that member states need to have to be able to put this in place? And thank you for joining us.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Thanks for the invitation to the High Representative. I'm going to carry on speaking in English because it'll be a little easier for me.
To be here and to speak on this topic with a French engineer and a Spanish mathematician, because this is about technology. We witness that technology holds immense potential for radical transformation, not only of our industries, but of our society, of our ethics, of our moral, down to the very question of what does it mean to be a human being. And while we often think about technology in Silicon Valley, where I live, let's not forget that Europe was the birthplace of technology. It was in Europe that we harnessed the Industrial Revolution, where we took scientific principles and created something unprecedented. It was in Europe that in 1885, Carl Benz and his wife Bertha created the car, a car that not only changed how we transport ourselves, it not only rendered the horse obsolete, it changed how we perceive distance. It changed how we perceive time. It has become to represent individual freedom. It is a story of innovation that has since transformed the world, today with 1.5 billion cars now in use. Europe is also the place where we take responsibility for that innovation. And so here, 150 years later, we also recognize that there were challenges with the internal combustion engine for climate change purposes, and now Europe is leading on green tech and figuring out what is the next frontier of making sure that technology lives up to European values. And so I want to delve a little bit on this question of what is the foreign political and geopolitical aspects of technology, because that is central to when we talk about technology hegemony. Because as technologies mature, commercialize, they have widespread adoption and use, they change not only the immediate tasks for which they were intended, but they change our systems, they change our institutions, our systems of governance, and that has now become true for both the world of diplomacy and geopolitics. So why is it that technology is a foreign political issue? For most of you, and I think for myself too, technology is with me from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed. And I even have a 7-month-old little baby, but still, this is spending as much time on me as my little son. It has changed the way that we communicate, how we work, how we socialize, how we find online dating, but it's also changed how systems are governed, how markets function, how democracy is exercised, and it's even changed the geopolitical waters that we're now trying to navigate as sovereign states. And this has caused new avenues for foreign policy issues to open up. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, 6G, it's more than simply just hardware and software. These are indicators of great power politics. We see cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns that calls to show that even states are pressured in cyberspace. And the investments in research and development of new technologies, as well as novel military applications, they are now key competitive parameters, as much as mining and access to technology. On the challenging side, we see how countries are using digital tools to advance foreign policy objectives in really what is the gray area between right and wrong, and between war and peace. These methods include cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. I think there is not a single country in the EU that has not experienced this firsthand. It is influence campaigns conducted through social media to undermine democracy and more fundamentally undermining our belief in what is true. It is also new technologies that provide authoritarian regimes with new opportunities for digital surveillance, behavior control, oppression, and censorship, and are used in targeting their own citizens. On the other side, and that's the bright side of technology, new technologies are giving democracy defenders, human rights activists, new tools for unprecedented mobility, advocacy, influence. Social media gives voice to the powerless. It allows for ordinary people to organize overnight and not have to only go to the opinion pages of the newspapers, but they can spread their word in an instant. New technologies are advancing transparency, anti-corruption, data privacy, accountability, and we are seeing how digitization of public services is not only giving better services, but also allowing citizens to better understand their states. So with all this geopolitical influence of technology, and as it becomes foreign policy, one thing I think is key to keep in mind is that this is not conducted by states only. On the contrary, in the 21st century, new players have stepped up on the task. These are the ones that are driving these changes. It's tech companies such as Google, Meta, Amazon, Tencent, ByteDance, European companies as well. They now have the size and the influence that surpasses that of many of the states that we're seeing and dealing with today. So they have unprecedented influence in our lives. And through the corporate decisions that they are taking, they are dictating not only the lives of us as individuals, but of our society and democracy. And that is when they de facto become foreign policy actors. Not least when we look at what's happening in the past 6 months in Ukraine, this casting as foreign policy protagonist has really become evident. And whether large tech companies want this or not, they have found themselves squeezed between freedom of speech principles and European political pressure for censoring Russian propaganda and protecting Western democracies. Before Ukraine, it was possible for tech companies naively and maybe arrogantly to say, look, we're just a neutral platform. I think that time is over. I think with Ukraine, we've now seen that there is a right and a wrong, and this is the opportunity and the moment to be on the right side of history, not the wrong one, even as a large tech company. So as private tech companies are really moving to the forward and becoming de facto people institutions who are leading our foreign policy, we as states, as institutions at Europe, we need to deal with these companies in a new way. And that is why Denmark elevated technology to a foreign and security political issue back in 2017 and appointed the first tech ambassador. I am lucky to be the second tech ambassador, so having a little bit to learn from. And the key challenge and the key task that I have is exactly to Commissioner Breton's, I think, great point, that tech hegemony should not be left to companies. It is up to countries to decide. And in this balance of power, right now there's asymmetry between states on the one side and large tech companies on the other side. And if we are to outbalance that asymmetry and making sure that it is democratic states who set the rules and the framework for how we go forward, we need a new type of diplomacy and we need a new strategic approach to this. So just in short, what is the vision for the EU on this? The EU has strong regulatory efforts on technology and digitization, but these must be out in the world by design rather than by default. The EU should actively promote a human rights-based vision for digitization, one that is really thinking about humans first before technology. And we should be an international, not only standard setter, but norm setter, and one that is helping not only the 27 member states, but the world embracing human-centered digitalization and technology. That's why Denmark has been, for the past year, advocating and working closely with the EAS on a cohesive European digital diplomacy strategy. One that elevates the amazing efforts that is taking place within the Union's borders, but at the same time is creating a stronger Europe on these issues outside of the region. I believe that the EU can play a leading role in shaping a responsible, a democratic, and a secure digital future that delivers solutions to the world's greatest challenges. And I want to mention 5 key elements in doing so. 1, building international digital partnership together with like-minded countries and allies together to address the security political implications. International digital partnerships is absolutely key, and the EU has already started this endeavor. I think we need to think about this as a big tent approach, not only as the 27 democracies that is in the EU, but with like-minded partners around, and building robustness regardless of what the administrations look like in those partnerships. Secondly, championing the global digital rules that build on human rights, democratic principles, and the rule of law. It is interesting that we here in 2022 talk about democracy as something to once again fight for, but unfortunately, for the first time in my lifetime, we're seeing a decline of democracies globally. Less and less people are living in democracies, and we see more and more countries on the cusp of democracy, unfortunately, choosing the wrong path. That is why championing democracy in digital governance is not only a nice to, but a need to. We want to preserve what is really the foundation of the EU and what we've been fighting for in the 20th century. Thirdly, it's about strengthening tech innovation across Europe. As we all know, the referee does not win the game. In order to win the game, you also need to be a player. This is about recognizing that we have an amazing industrial base in Europe. We also know that most innovation and disruption don't come from the traditional players. So how do we continue to support startups? And while it is almost my great pleasure of welcoming wonderful European startups in California, I wish that they would stay in Europe and scale up here. Fourth, it is about making technology support the EU's security. This is about working with like-minded partners. I think there is, you probably discussed this at length this week already, but the security political aspects of technology have never been more present. Building a better understanding of the security implications, making sure that innovation, privacy, and security are not each other's opposites, but rather something that we see as complementary, and finding the way forward in this is key. Ensuring that member states remain at the cutting edge of military and dual-use technology together with like-minded countries and NATO, while also raising awareness about what is happening in the private sector. And then finally, this last point is quite unique. We kind of harness this unique geopolitical moment to put pressure on and convince tech companies, as I said earlier, their platforms and products are center stage for a global fight for democracy, for freedom, for self-determination. And there's no longer this option of being neutral. They have to work with us. They have to be on the same side. We have been regulating them, yes, but technology is still incredibly influential. And we need a hybrid governance model, one that also includes direct, critical dialogue with the industry, a deeper understanding and knowledge of technology, and making sure that the regulation that we set also becomes norm setting abroad. So I think in conclusion, I think we're experiencing a Van Neumann moment. Van Neumann, he was a Hungarian-Austrian mathematician who, he was part of Robert Oppenheimer's Manhattan Project, as you know, during World War II, creating the nuclear bomb. And when he joined, it was not only on his research on explosives, but also a contribution, he is the father of game theory. The game theory to the fundamental political understanding of how we know today that the nuclear bomb was not an end, but a much more complex geopolitical game. I think we are experiencing a Van Neumann moment today. One where it's not only about playing the game, but where Europe can help set the fundamental rules of the world for how the game should be played. This is not about only a race to fastest develop superior AI or quantum to dominate militarily, because that becomes a zero-sum game. This is about raising the bars. This is a values-based game. One where it's not sophisticated algorithms, but it's sophisticated politicians, it's sophisticated institutions that are making sure that we need to set the rules for this game going forward. That it's not only about military and commercial superiority of the technologies that we create in a sort of tech hegemony, but it's guaranteed by high demands to privacy, transparency, democracy, responsibility, and applicability for solving societal challenges. So we are setting the very board from where the game of geopolitics of emerging technologies will be played out in the next 5, 10, and 15 years. With that, I've been incredibly pleased and delighted to see, I think, the things that have taken place in the EU as a proud European representing European governance, industry, startups in Silicon Valley. It has been recognized very much that the EU is becoming a geopolitical player in this endeavor as well. But I still think, and looking forward to the conclusion and discussion here, the quest for ensuring human-centric tech development and digitization is not one. We don't have all the right pieces there yet, but I think we're on the right track and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Muchas gracias, Anne-Marie.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. I'm now going to ask Tyson Barker to ask him, because as we put up on the title of this session, retweets is not endorsement. We don't like the title of the fight for a technological predominance globally, but the truth is both US and China are actually immersed in a dispute for this technological predominance. And it's in this setting I'd like to ask you, Tyson, what or how do you regard the role of Europe and the EU? Is there space for the EU, or are there only just two models, the Chinese and the US model, and our lives are going to be a bit difficult? How can we agree with the US, and you're a specialist in transatlantic relations? To what extent should we agree with them, and to what extent legitimately should we make a difference, and to what extent are there different ways of doing the same things, but we don't want to just join automatically and uncritically the US model? Where are the limits to cooperation and maybe conflict, or not conflict so much, but dissent? I prefer that. It's a less strong word.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here in Spain. I am a great admirer of Alexis de Tocqueville. He is a French philosopher and journeyman who spent a lot of time in the United States in the 19th century, and I think he did a better job than anybody at explaining the US to Americans themselves. And so I will try to play the de Tocqueville role a little bit on this panel, the American interpreting from distance, but with great admiration, Europe's role in the geotech landscape. So let's start with this idea of hegemony, because I think it's really important. When you look at the way internet governance and tech governance has developed, it is a product of a hegemonic moment, a unipolar moment in some ways, of the early 90s, where there was a great consensus around certain liberal values emerging from the victorious moment after the Cold War. And I want to start with a quote from one of internet governance's founding fathers, John Perry Barlow, who wrote a very, very influential treatise called The Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace in 1996 when he was at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And he presented it actually at the World Economic Forum. This quote is very meaningful because I think it tells us a lot about what the internet's founders, those founding fathers, thought that the internet should look like. He said, "Governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of the mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather." And of course, this is a reflection of a worldview at the time, a light state touch, openness, that the state was rescinding, and that a kind of multi-stakeholder consensus-based form of governance was emerging where technological expertise rather than ideology would lead. And of course, in this year, in 2022, we know that sovereignty is back with a vengeance. And the question of contested sovereignty online and in the tech space is really a driver for geopolitics today. I think the best thing that captures this, not just in the technological domain, but just in general domains, is an idea of connectivity itself. We are experiencing multiple connectivity crises right now, where flows, hubs, critical nodes, and choke points are becoming the dimension of power, of geopolitical power, between state and other actors. There are a couple of academics in the United States, Abe Newman and Henry Farrell, who call this weaponized interdependence. And I think if you think about different areas, we see this everywhere in geopolitics today. In energy and climate change, clearly Russia's role in cutting off LNG flows to Europe is a choke point that they're trying to use for geopolitical aims. But the same is true in climate change, where systemic actors are sometimes dragging their feet, including the United States, but also other players. And that's going to have a direct impact on other countries and other stakeholders. Financial market connectivity. The liberalization of capital flows has led to capital movements which have created asset bubbles that can be weaponized and retracted. We're seeing that in some cases today. Trade connectivity, supply chain chokeholds. We're seeing this in semiconductors, in food, in critical materials like rare earths, where we're having to rethink our dependencies on untrustworthy actors, particularly authoritarian states. Health connectivity was discussed. Commissioner Breton brought this up, that the availability of vaccines can be in some ways instrumentalized by states as an extension of power, but also community spread of diseases, which we've seen with COVID-19 and we're currently seeing with monkeypox. Connectivity of migration can be weaponized. Again, Commissioner Breton brought this up in the case of refugees, the spigot of refugees that was turned on prior to the Ukraine crisis through Belarus, where Russia was trying to instrumentalize the flow of migrants, of refugees into Europe for political aims. But we see this in Syria, we see it in Ukraine today. And of course, and this is why we're here, digital connectivity, where online gatekeepers, ICT infrastructure, lock-in effects, preponderant power of certain actors, these are all instruments of power. And the openness that we created, where no sovereignty existed in the past, creates some grade of weakness when there aren't rules in play. And just to quote one example of this, we see this in cybersecurity, clearly. That the openness of the digital international system creates vulnerabilities. In fact, last week, the head of the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, a $1.2 trillion wealth fund, said that cybersecurity is a bigger threat to economic stability than global capital flows and inflation right now. But we see this, of course, in disinformation degrading democracy. We see this in the proliferation of digital authoritarian, et cetera. So this moment that we have is a moment where sovereignty is back with a vengeance. And in the technological space, that's creating, that's coming against some technological development backdrops, which NATO has called, and I think this is very apt, a moment of strategic simultaneity, where a lot of things are happening at once. So just to give you an example, we're in a moment where there are multiple general purpose technologies coming online that will have a transformative impact on every aspect of our lives. In the past, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term general purpose technology, but this is technology that's not just used in military context or civilian context, but is used everywhere. This is the enabling technology. This is the operating system of our technological lives. Things like fire, electricity, the telegraph, technologies that really reordered society. And in this moment, so those were big disruptive technologies that came online over hundreds of years, generations, etc. Right now, in this moment, we have artificial intelligence, quantum computing, augmented reality, virtual reality, high-performance computing, blockchain, distributed ledger technology, biotechnology, all coming online at the same time. And they're all going to have disruptive impacts on the way that we interact with each other, we interact with states, and states interact with each other. Second element of strategic simultaneity is the geopolitical competition between the US and China, which was mentioned, where technological superiority is a key, if not the key theater. Third is the rise of digital authoritarianism. So China, again, technology, this was mentioned, technology is ideology, it freights ideology, and the United States, Europe, India, China, we are all trying to use technology to import or export our ideologies. And we see this, for example, with the Belt and Road Initiative in China, where it's trying to create data centers, trying to create 5G technology, create lock-in effects in third countries. And states, digital deciders, these swing states in the global south, sometimes are very allured by the idea that this kind of authoritarian technology can build out state capacity, which will allow them to consolidate control. Fourth, we have the increased frequency of cyber operations, and we all know this. Solar winds, Colonial Pipeline, but even things that rock the stability of governments. And I don't know how much you are all familiar with the this Russian cyber group Conti's attacks on the Costa Rican government, but it almost led to the fall of the government. I mean, these are really systemically important cyber operations. Fifth, we have the renaissance of technological industrial policy. And in this way, I think we are all realizing that we have ceded in like-minded states in the United States, Europe, etc. We've ceded too much ground in critical technologies to state-centric actors like China, but also other states in East Asia, and it's time for us to rebuild our indigenous capacity. And sixth, in this kind of moment of strategic simultaneity is the breakdown of the digital international system and increase of digital mercantilism. So technology is a vector of power. Europe realizes this, the United States realizes this, China obviously realizes this, and it's become a key element of its grand strategy globally. So what do? Well, the first thing that we have to do, and I think the Commission has started to do this, is expand beyond the role of creating the rule book. The rule book is extremely important, but we also have to check and map our critical technology dependencies. The Biden administration has done this. They did a list of what they see as the critical and emerging technologies and said, okay, where do we stand on these technologies? Are we a leader globally, the United States? Are we a peer? Or do we have a risk management issue? And Europe is starting to do this as well. We've already seen this in critical materials, but it's also doing this in technology. We at the German Council on Foreign Relations did a survey of European stakeholders to ask what they thought what was the status of Europe, a kind of hold up a mirror to Europe on 5 technologies: artificial intelligence, cloud computing, semiconductors, 5 and 6G mobile network equipment, and quantum computing. And Europe, our group of stakeholders, 76% believed that Europe was too dependent on external actors in cloud computing, 68% too dependent on external actors in artificial intelligence, 54% too dependent on external actors in 5G mobile network equipment, and 41% on quantum computing. And of this, of the technologies we surveyed, all but one, they saw the dependence as too high on the United States. So this obviously brings up a really important question. How does Europe orient itself to its most important global partner? I would call it its systemic partner. So we have systemic rivals. The systemic partner for the United States, or for Europe, is of course the United States. So we asked, in a technological confrontation between the United States and China, how should Europe position itself? Should it get closer to the United States? Should it get closer to China? Or should it pursue a third way? And the results were quite interesting. Of the people we surveyed, and we surveyed hundreds of people who are experts in this area, many multi-stakeholders, private sector, commission officials, elected officials, etc. Nobody said that Europe should get closer to China. 0. Not one person. 46% said that Europe should orient itself to the United States, and 54% said that Europe should pursue an independent path. So there is the interesting kind of geopolitical fault line on technology for Europe. It is of 2 minds on this. Should it pursue a kind of G2 path with the United States, with the TTC as kind of the hub, or should it look for a third way between the United States and Europe? Of course, more closely aligned with the United States, but something that is not too tightly bound to the United States. And I think that this is the important question that people like the people on this panel have to answer, because that is a really tough path to chart. Thank you so much.
A lot of questions, huh? Yeah, a lot of questions. Thierry, do you want to say something?
No. But maybe you want to start?
Yes, say something about...
Well, first, maybe we put this here. Many things to say. And by the way, both from Anne-Marie and from Tyson. I like Anne-Marie when presentation, especially when you said your 5 recommendations, which join a little bit your main concern, Tyson. The first one was partnership with our like-minded partners. Partnership with our like-minded partners. Tyson, could you explain to me what is a like-minded partner? Could you explain this to me? Because you know, I worked all my life in the United States, and I thought the US were our like-minded partners. And I realized the hard way that when there is a crisis, no more like-minded partner, only for me. America first. So my point is, I will always remember, Tyson, the meeting that we had with Ursula von der Leyen and with President Trump in Davos. It was almost 3 years ago. And President Trump said to us, we were 4 of us, with our former colleague Phil Hogan. He said, look, you need to pay what we owe us. We will leave NATO. We don't want to stay in NATO. It doesn't work. He said this to us. Like-minded partner. Like-minded partner of yesterday will be a like-minded partner of tomorrow. Big question for us, because at the end of the day, we are responsible for the security and the well-being of 445 million inhabitants, our fellow citizens. all my life I worked in technology. So I know that in technology, nothing is more important but partnerships. But look, 54% in your poll of our EU fellow citizens said we need to do it as much as we can on our own. Why? We all love the United States, me first. But is it a trustable partner? I'm sorry to raise the question, but this question is raised everywhere now in Europe, and especially after what happened in Afghanistan, after what happened in the vaccine. Personally, I worked as much as I can to increase the partnership. But sometimes I realize that it's my duty and my responsibility to make sure that whatever could happen, we need to be able to continue to work without being too dependent. So that's why it's really complex. I mean, it's a little bit, how should I phrase it? I don't want to be let's say, provocative, but it is a little bit too academic. The reality is not like this. The reality is when your friend José say, Thierry, sorry, but your factory is here in the United States. No, it's for us. But you know, I had the same story also with our Chinese systemic rival, not systemic partner, and I like the systemic partner and systemic rival. When I had to call in March 2020 the Minister of Trade of China because he was blocking some mask production in our Chinese-owned manufacturing in China, in the Pearl-Detroit River. He blocked it. So I called him, and he said, oh, sorry, Mr. Commissioner, but you know, we are in a crisis, so everything which is produced in China, because of the crisis, is for People Republic of China first. I say, what? But it's the end of globalization. No, that's what I say. That's what I understand. So now, so you know, I mean that things are a little bit more complex than this. Even the TTC. By the way, you know how we invented the TTC with Phil Hogan? Because we were trying, TTC means Tech and Trade Council, and we are trying to find smart ways to interact with the Trump administration. It was not too easy. Since I was the Commissioner for Tech and Phil Hogan was the Commissioner for Trade, we decided to have this let's say, joint channel together. So my point here is that, of course, we need to have partnerships. But of course, we need to know exactly how to secure, how to build a secure line in all the technologies that you described, AI, cloud, semiconductors, 6G. By the way, I'm interested because in 6G, you said that in your poll, people say in Europe we are too dependent on the US,
No.
where
China. That was the one.
China, where in fact it's not true. Because we own 56% of the patents in 5G networks and 58% of the production of the 5G networks with two companies. So I mean, this is of course not a final point that we didn't discuss here. And again, my job is to I will always try to work with the US because this is where we are close, this is where we have a lot of interest, they are our partners for history, and we will do everything we can to increase this partnership. But again, with a caveat that I just mentioned at the beginning. Final point, we didn't discuss about this, but that's extremely important. Sometimes we see Europe as a regulating power. And I know that my US friends sometimes tell me, oh, Thierry, you're very good in regulating, but you are not good in innovation. It's not true. We are the first democracy in the world. And since we are the first democracy in the world, there is one space, which, by the way, is also belong to us politicians, to make sure that everything will happen in this space, respect our values. It is the digital space. In this digital space, where we spend 45% of our time, you mentioned your children. We have our rules and values, but not in this space, even if our children spend some time, more than 50% of their time here. And you know that in this space, this is like the Far West. And we just decided, look, there's nothing to do against anybody. It's not against the US companies. It's not against the Chinese company. It is just to protect our people also in this space because it is our role as politicians. And not to leave our children alone in the hands of we don't know whom. So this is why, since day one, with my friend Margaret Vestager, we started to work to bring our values in the digital space. It is the DSA, and also to make sure that the competition will be fair. It is a DMA. And we didn't do it, and I had so many discussions with my friend Gina Raimondo, she is my counterpart in the US government. Said, oh, Thierry, but maybe you do this against a US company. I said, no, I don't do this against anybody. I do this because it is our responsibility to protect our people in this space. And by the way, I hope that we'll be able to help our US friends to do what we did. But remember also, Tyson, we are the first digital market also in the free world. 1.5 bigger than the US. And that's why, here also, everyone in technology needs to have access to our market, and they will have access. But it's our duty to make sure that when they enter into our digital space, they know our rules, and they will be welcome. But you know, and it will be my conclusion, in continental Europe, we are driving on the right side of the road. That's a fact. Oh, yes, but I built a car for the left side. Too bad. You're welcome, but build a car driving on the right side on the road. You see what we did. Voilà.
Go ahead, Tyson, and then, you know, we will move to Anne-Marie, but of course to...
Sure. First of all, we also in the United States also drive on the right side of the road, so we're definitely on the same page on that one. I mean, I think you bring up a good point, and this has been brought up again and again. There's a misperception that Europe doesn't have innovation, and even if you look at the genesis of the internet that we know, the TCP/IP, the Internet Protocol, of course, was invented in California and developed in California, but the World Wide Web was developed at CERN. So there's a complementarity, there's a kind of interdependence, a transatlantic interdependence that has driven digital technology, ICT technology from the very beginning. I understand the concern on the like-minded question, and that's a really slippery term that we hear a lot in tech diplomacy is, oh, we got to work with our like-minded states. Well, what is a like-minded state? Is that a democracy? Does that mean we should be working more with India, with Brazil? Of course we want to, but they don't always share the view that that Europe has, for example, or even the United States in Europe, or the G7. Does that mean working with a state like Vietnam, which might believe in a rules-based order, but is clearly not a democracy? I think that the ambiguity in that term is one of the reasons why it's often used. But between the relationship between the United States and Europe, this is why this moment in particular with the Biden administration is so crucial, because Europe has a willing partner. No administration, perhaps ever, definitely not the Obama administration, which I worked in, has invested so much in elevating its relationship with the EU. None. And in particular on the trade and tech front, through the Trade and Technology Council, but in other areas as well, the Declaration on the Future of the Internet, negotiating a successor agreement to Privacy Shield, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that for the for the Biden people, what they want to see in the kind of spirit of a foreign policy for the middle class is this approach to working with like-minded partners that share those values yields dividends on both sides. And the best way for Europe to build resilience into that, and I think that this is happening in the TTC, if you read the Pittsburgh Joint Declaration, you see this, is to say, even when we cooperate, even when we create we open markets, we work together on semiconductors, on R&D, etc., it needs to be mutually beneficial. And we can't create asymmetric dependencies. There needs to be strategic interdependence. Because whatever political changes happen in the United States, if there's a reliance on unique chokeholds that Europe has, like at IMEC, like at ASML, then that becomes the basis for that relationship, even when the values aren't necessarily there. So I think that the Commission and Washington are very assiduous in how they develop this. Sometimes on both sides of the Atlantic, of course, they want to be a little more greedy and say, oh, well, we just want to work with ASML and we just want to work with the Netherlands. And then maybe the EU comes in and says, no, we need to think more broadly. In thinking about implementation of subsidies in semiconductors, this is already starting to occur, where both sides are saying, okay, let's create a dashboard. When we're subsidizing R&D, chip manufacturing, fabs, let's make sure we're not duplicating, but we're creating complementarity. Because first of all, these companies want as much money as they can get from, public coffers. And second, we want to create those dependencies. So maybe if there is a focus on niche chips that deal with IoT in Europe, there might be niche chips that deal with data centers in the United States, etc. So that, I think, is key. But we have to be, on both sides of the Atlantic, very anticipatory in how we approach that. Because, as the Commissioner said, on any side of the Atlantic, we don't know where politics is going. So we have to build in those safeguards from the beginning.
Marie?
It seems like we're always one election away from catastrophe, and we need to figure out how to deal with that in the future. I think the key is not dependency, but interdependency, and making sure that when we talk about the transatlantic relationship, it is not only Europe dependent on technology from the US, but as much vice versa. And it's not only technology going one way and regulation going the other, but it is both regulation and technology. And to the question of what is like-minded, I think it is a normative term. I think that many of the countries we perceive as like-minded, they are far from 100% like-minded. We use it to push, to advance like-mindedness. And that is why digital partnership, they must be more than just lofty, abstract words. They need to have substance, content, proper tech transfer, proper collaboration, proper substance on regulation, on governance, on standards, on expectations to what a digital partnership means. And it's about building robustness into those. So even though the catastrophe might be around the corner with the next election, we find robustness. And I'm always encouraged by thinking that the TTC discussions, as I understand, they actually started during the previous administration. I think a lot of their success now has been partly because of probably current administration, but looking towards building robustness also in those critical conversations and relationships. And I think on the transatlantic piece, recently, the last 6 months, we're also seeing what the U.S. have been doing in Europe and a sort of great undertaking and collaboration in securing and supporting Ukraine. And so thinking through how does that, at times challenging, but an incredibly important relationship look going forward. I think member states is key in that as well. And you asked that question in the beginning, what can member states do? I think with a strong and clear vision that the Commission and then the EAS is putting out also for digital diplomacy, for the Europe as a strong tech region, for tech hegemony, let member states not only support that, but actively play into that. So with our bilateral relationship as member states with other countries and like-minded partners, we support not only sovereign interests, but also an EU interest and an EU narrative. And that's why the questions around the broader visions for what the Europe should be, is right now, is so important.
Maybe just to add one point, and I think what you said is very important. And I really agree with what you said. We have a very strong willingness and very good cooperation with the Biden administration. But it's true, Tyson, that it really started after the Afghanistan withdrawal and after AUKUS. Before, we had the feeling that Europe was not exactly on the radar screen. So we have to be honest. We have been vocal, saying, hey, we exist, Don't forget your partners. Don't forget your like-minded partner when you decide to exit a country where we all were together. But that's history. Now, be realistic. It's true that we are working extremely well with a very, very good spirit. There's only one caveat that I would like to say. We are talking a lot of TTC. I just told you how the TTC has been created and how it has been, that's for history records, how it has been reactivated. When Joe Biden decided to come, and we are very happy to invite him in Brussels, you remember you were here to welcome with Ursula von der Leyen, José, we said, oh, what can we do to start again a new cooperation? And we said, hey, here we have the TTC that we started with Trump administration. Oh, what is this? Oh, very good. Tech and trade. But why don't we reactivate it? And we did. And I think it was a very smart idea. But there is a but. Today we don't have still good enough, because I'm very pragmatical. I need results. We don't have yet enough results from the TTC, I should be honest, and we all know that. And we should avoid to use tech against trade. And sometimes I see in the administration, oh, it's good, I could then bargain, I give you some trade, but give me some tech. We know our friends, and we know how we are. That's life. So that's why I think it's extremely important in the TTC to maintain the text channel, to do exactly what you said, in a balanced way, to do what you do this, we do this, how do you spend, and we are very transparent. And also, in parallel, the trade, which is extremely important, but not mix the two parallels. They should stay in parallel, they should not interconnect, because then you could have electricity.
That's a very good explanation. I wanted maybe to put on the table two topics we've been discussing the days before, and that we will be discussing also this afternoon. On the context, for example, the first one is the defense industry and the defense field. The High Rep discussed this issue on Monday and Tuesday, and of course, you know, you're very welcome to comment on that. But I wanted to ask Commissioner Breton, in the light of the increase of budgets, military budgets in Europe, for example, I think there is one element which focuses very well the discussion, which is the decision by some countries to buy F-35s, right? Which is a technology that maybe, seeing the state of the Russian army and the Russian Air Force, we don't even need, because the Russian Air Force is not being able to defeat the Ukrainian Air Force, right? But do you see an issue in the way this military expenditure is being dealt with, that will help or not Europe to attain this, of course, sovereignty? And also, you know, what are the plans, and how do you plan to convince, if so the case, member states that this is the moment? Because as Airbus Chief Executive Officer has reminded us, when you buy an F-35, the combat system of the plane is in the US cloud, right? So all your plans and all your capabilities are automatically transferred to a private company, but also therefore to the US. This is one topic I wanted to raise, but also, and then maybe we still have time, because I think Anne-Marie can stay for a while also, on the issue on green tech, because we made the same mistakes on green tech at the beginning by allowing China to produce the solar panels, the wind generators. So it would be a great paradox that we escape the dependency on fossil fuels and the geopolitics of fossil fuels in order to start a dependency on Chinese green tech technologies, raw materials, and everything. So maybe if you could comment on first, maybe on this one thing, if there are reactions from the panel, and then maybe we can move to green tech. So please, defense industry and the opportunity that we have now.
No, I don't want to be too long, but it is true that, by the way, Anne-Marie mentioned it when we said using technology to support defense, and she was absolutely right. But it's true that we have to avoid that member states will not use the very strong and expected increase in their defense budget not to increase our defense industry. But let's be honest. First, I don't want to comment too much the F-35, because it is a decision from the past. It was the end of this decision. We know why the German government decided to take F-35s, because they needed, we know their position with the nuclear weapons, and they needed to be compatible with the NATO obligation and so on. So it was the only aircraft to fulfill this. So I don't want to. I mean, we need to see the true reasons. And sometimes I know that you should. You want to have a European industry, but they buy F-35. Again, we know exactly why, and I'm not the one we will criticize this decision, because again of the position of Germany and their obligations regarding NATO. But since we speak about obligation, we all have committed, member of NATO, to spend, I think, at least 2% of our GDP in defense. And how many times the High Representative mentioned this to the Minister of Defense, in the past 3 years. Finally, maybe because of the geopolitical event and because of Putin's decision, finally, even countries being extremely reluctant, like for example Germany, but not only, decided to move from 1% to 2%. And by the way, it means that, just to give you an idea, if any European countries have done their jobs or their commitment, we will then invest, since the beginning of this century, 1.3 trillion more in defense, and we will be elsewhere. Just to tell you. And by the way, I don't want to blame anyone, especially coming from the country I'm coming, where we spend probably too much versus our capacity, and the debt is increasing high. But it's true that it's probably more easy to be a good student when you don't spend what you have to spend to protect yourself than vice versa. Because if the good students, or so-called frugal, will have spent what they had to spend, there will not be exactly at the same level of debt, and there they could speak a little bit differently. We need to speak together and not to be against each other. Just en passant. Huh? Now, coming back on defense spending, you are absolutely right. This is the moment for Europe. We all realize that we need to spend more, but we need to spend better. And this is where the Commission immediately, after these announcements, took the decision to propose a new act where member states, if they buy together ammunition, resources, procurements, if they, four of them buy together, then we will be able to put some money on top of it to support this. And I think it is a very important movement to answer, because this is a very strong incentive. We need to recreate the willingness to work together for the general interest of Europe, and of course for the general interest of our defense industry, because we need to increase and enhance the defense industry. And also, because we will have now this new increase in defense budget, this will give visibility, of course, for the defense industry. Defense industry needs to invest in its capacity. They need to have visibility. So we need to have commitment upfront to be able to increase, of course, on the mid-term, long-term, our capacity to increase the defense industry of all European countries. And that's extremely important in all our projects. 30% at least should come from SMEs, at least 4 different countries, to make sure that it's not only the 2 or 3 biggest usual suspects who could benefit from it. We want to have an affectio societatis with defense with every single member state. So that's how we start to answer it. We will work again, now that's a pilot, we will work again with a more global and advanced project probably at the end of this year. But this is how we tried to react together to answer to your question. Thank you.
If you want to follow up on this, I don't know whether Mr. Borrell wants to follow on the defense point. Okay, you want to say? Yeah, sorry.
La autonomía.
Well, regarding autonomy, we cannot pretend to have strategic autonomy if there's no industrial basis for it. It's something self-evident. And Europe has element to have industrial capacities, but they are present in different countries. They compete amongst themselves instead of cooperating. We've cooperated in civil aeronautics, but we haven't been able to do so in military aeronautics, to give you one example. The example of Airbus, which is a story of success that should be used to foster, and that's why I said that Thierry not only has narrative, he has power and money. He has a fund with which he can incentivize industrial behaviors. Because those that have an industry or lead an industry have a balance sheet, and financial incentive is very important. The U.S. incentivizes its defense industry in a massive manner. We don't do the same thing, or maybe we do it in a way that we give money to industries in different countries and don't really create a joint movement. And of course it's complex because defense, it's a power of each of the countries. So sometimes there's a reluctance to have capacity pools. And as there is a reluctance, we need to promote it. And to be able to promote it, we need resources. And that is the main role that the European Fund for Defense will have. And we will have incentives for joint procurements together with the European Defense Agency. But let's see what we can achieve with this. In any case, technology has always led the world, and specifically the world of war, because war is carried out with weapons, and weapons are manufactured with technology. We conquered South America not because we were more courageous, but because we had steel and weapons. And nowadays, disruptive technologies in the military sphere are the ones that will be deciding on hegemonies, and we have to be very present, and we need to be aware of what these disruptive technologies are.
There are still 5 more minutes, or 10, so that our guest doesn't miss his plane.
Looking at our defense in the future, we should not replicate the defense of the past, because war is going to look differently. Deterrence in this world that we're looking into is going to be not only mastering tanks and boots in the ground, but it is AI, quantum, drones, all of these new technologies, and using them in a military capacity. So I think to that point, one, working with the tech industry in Europe, particularly those that are dual use. Most of them see themselves as civic tech companies, but their technologies can be used also for dual use, and making them sure that they also see that part as European defense and part of a European defense industry. Looking at the majority of the technology in the iPhone, it was not developed by Apple, but by NASA and the US military. And if we are to look at sort of EU technology hegemony, it's also working with those actors that don't see themselves as a sort of the traditional defense industry. And then just, I think, one point on green sort of defense industry and green technology, I think we need to think them together as part of one. Independency and energy, green transition and national security is the same imperative. And right now, in a few days, the Danish Prime Minister will meet with Commissioner President von der Leyen in the Baltic Sea region on the small Danish island of Bornholm for a meeting on how to secure energy independence in the Baltic region while at the same time accelerating the green transition. And I think Europe can be the place of thinking through strategically how do we advance defense and ultimately supporting and strengthening and defending our freedom, our interest, our self-sovereignty, while at the same time accelerating and using this huge investment that's being undertaken in Europe right now for green transition, green technologies, civic technologies that we can use also for other purposes. So I think this is, again, a phenomenon moment where we define the game that's being played, where we define the rules of that games. And as Europeans, not only sort of fell into what is right now very high cost on the military spending, but making sure that we also develop technologies of the future.
Yeah, Tyson, we mentioned we mentioned yesterday how strategic AI is in the United States, to the point to which the Mayor report done by the National Security Council is co-authored by William Perry, a former Secretary of Defense, but also Eric Schmidt from Google. That's the military-industrial complex at its best, in a sense, or a proof of you know, how close you are, or what is your vision. So please comment also on this, you know.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with a European economist this week, actually, and he said, well, we were talking about development of strategic technologies in the United States and industrial policy, and he said, well, the U.S. doesn't have an industrial policy. I said, yes, it does. It has the Defense Department. We were talking this morning about the dysfunctionality of Congress and how it's hard to pass bills, but the only thing that always passes is the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the budget for the Pentagon. Always. And if you look at the approach of the National Security Commission on AI, which released a very arresting report saying that the United States is losing ground to China on intellectual property and artificial intelligence, on human capital. It needs to reform its education system, its immigration system, the way it funds universities, the tech transfer between universities and commercial companies, and between civil and military companies in the Pentagon. Very, very comprehensive interdisciplinary report. It really focused minds, but it had the language of power and the framework of systemic competition between the United States and China. What Europe did, and it had a similar process, but it was refracted through Europe's experience, which is it had something called the High-Level Expert Group on AI. And what that did was another expert group to look at AI and how Europe should shape its AI environment, and it was focused primarily on ethics and rules. So in the United States, you have systemic competition, power. In Europe, you have rules. And the question is, can both sides balance each other a little more? Would it be useful for Europe, for example, to have a European Security Commission on AI to frame the development of dual-use technologies in this more strategic context with the defense industry at the table as well? And I live in Germany right now. I can tell you it's a struggle. Even if you look at the R&D landscape in Germany, many universities and institutions have something called civil clauses, which create a barrier between the development of civil technology and its use in military applications. And that is an artificial barrier when we're talking about general purpose technologies that can be used in both. So policy has to reflect the nature of technology itself, and to do that it needs to get more broad, and I think Europe has an opportunity here to put the language of power, the relationship with other states in its discourse a little more, beyond ethics and rules.
Commissioner, maybe a concluding word also if you want, so we can say bye and thanks to everyone for joining.
No, but thank you very much for this this invitation. As you see, this is never-ending discussions because, of course, technology, as we all said, is supporting all the transitions that we have to support. Because maybe it will be my conclusion, José. We will be soon on this planet 8 billion inhabitants. And then maybe 9. This never happened in our human history, never. And of course, this creates huge challenges. This means that we have to change probably all our habits. Of course, we see this with the climate change. We feel it with migrations. We know it with geopolitical tensions. We understand it when we say, by the way, I said that we were the first democracy in the world, but we represent less than 5% of the population. So please, let's be modest. And less than 3% for the US. So, I mean, this is the reality of our world. So it means also that I don't speak about water. I don't speak about knowledge. I don't speak about education. I don't speak about... Of course, we need to get used to have more pandemics, unfortunately, because we are moving, and we are 8 billion inhabitants. This is when we touch each other that we can, again, spread the virus, or any new virus. And this is why we need, in this very moment, not only to think, of course, of ourselves, but to rethink all the relations between us. And here again, I think that in Europe, we are extremely lucky and fortunate because we have a project. We know what we want to achieve. It's difficult, like any ambition, but we have the vision, based on rule of law, based on shared values. We are not here to say we want to impose our values outside of the world. We just have the small ambition to do it for our people and to take care of the rest if they ask us to do it like they did during the vaccine. So here again, technology will play an extremely important role. We know that. Change everything. By the way, some say that in China they use technology to increase the autocratic system and surveillance. Some say that in the US they're not strong enough and they leave the decision in the hands of few platforms. And in Europe, we just try, because of our history, because of what we are, to adapt this new world based on our rules, on what we are. So again, we don't say that we are right, we just say that we tried to adapt ourselves and to play our role as human beings. Thank you.
Thank you everybody for this excellent panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Thierry. Thank you to all of you. Many questions. The answers will come. ¿Quieres dar una palabra?
Do you want to control who talks and who doesn't? Do you want to do the mic control here?
Que marche, pero
If Thierry has to leave, let him leave, but I think the floor we need to give to the public, if anybody's asked for it.
A recoger un
Let's get some questions collected up. There's one here in the front, and please control the microphone. I'm a senator. Just very quickly, in the 90s, Europe did have relevance digitally in that it dominated 2G, 3G. And there was a frontline manufacturer of terminals, Nokia, called Nokia, and in Europe 30% of semiconductors of the world were manufactured. I don't know if that was followed by a series of years of decline, but I just remember in the 2000 there was an extraordinary European Council meeting when the Lisbon strategy was set up, which said that by 2010 in European territory we would be the most competitive territory in the world and the territory which would store the greatest amount of knowledge in the world. And then happened what happened. So in Europe, what we have now is that less than 10% of semiconductors are produced. Maybe there's the will to reach 20%. We import all our handsets, our telephone handsets. We don't have any manufacturers of handsets. We've been left behind in 4G, and we're fully dependent when we talk about 5G. Now, I hardly need to mention the hyper-dependence on digital platforms. Of the 20 companies, the 20 largest companies around the world digitally, there's not one single European one. I don't know if we can say that Europe is living through a sort of digital colonialism, but I'd like to applaud and share all the optimism and the activities being developed by the European Commission in the digital world. But with the permission of the High Representative and paraphrasing the title of this course, I wanted to ask whether now we are witnessing the birth of a geotechnological Europe. And I mean geotechnology as a combination of power, knowledge, and geography. Thank you.
Something to say? No, just do.
Yo quería solamente.
I just wanted to ask a question, a very quick question, which is, do you think it would be a good idea for European states to lose or to cede some sovereignty and hand it over to the European Union? There's another question, I think, if we could just take that from the gentleman in front of you. And it's a similar question to the previous people. We are seeing a conflict between cooperation and competition. In research, we're pretty good. In the Airbus industry, we've also got technology in the aerospace industry. What we don't achieve is others. I remember recently there was a wish to create common high-speed trains, and that was forbidden because the competition commissioner forbade that. We in the technology need to show our ability in engineering and our ability to set up a pan-Europe technology, high speed to connect our capital cities, and this would actually be able to replace more than 40% of European internal flights. Why isn't this happening? This is the conflict between engineers and economists that's being badly handled. Please, maybe you could reply, because you're both things, an economist and an engineer. Can you please make use of the microphones? We interpreters actually cannot hear with this lack of discipline in microphone use.
No, very quickly, because I think this is the three questions are related to the same topic, more or less. I know that there is, or there was a tendency to say, in Europe, we are lagging behind. And by the way, this narrative was pushed probably by Europeans, but by all our best friends. And sometimes also best like-minded partners. Sometimes. I know. But it is not true. I'm sorry to say. We are not perfect at all. You're absolutely right when you said where we were in 2000 and when we are now. This is true. I just want to mention two things. First, we didn't speak about comment on dit les mots.
En français?
Non, c'est pas la régulation, c'est tout ce qui est I will come back. But we let China in all the regulatory international bodies to take our room. I don't know why. Wait.
Technical standards.
Voilà, the tech standards. Sorry, thank you. We were very strong in tech standards in 2000, together with the US, and we let China and all others to take our place. And of course, now we started to change this because standards play an extremely important role in tech. And we have been too naive here. Maybe also sometimes, it was in discussions behind the scene with China and companies and also countries. We know, including in Africa, we know that. But now we decided to take back what we need, including to protect, let's say, our industry, because the standards is also a way to protect your IP, your know-how, and your expertise. But then, there's things which are not true, I'm sorry to say. I know that for 5G, you said we are totally dependent. It's not true. 5G was invented in Europe. And Europe owns the largest portfolio of patents. I know that some Chinese companies were trying to say the opposite. It is not true. So it doesn't mean that we don't want to start to be strong in 6G too, including with the US. And by the way, in the TTC, we have a joint program working together in 6G, because again, our companies are very interlinked between US and Europe. So again, here, I understand your point, but I really think that today, with everything we said, there is, let's say, maybe a wake-up call that we have been maybe too naive over the past 20 years, and that now we need to change this, and we call it, some call it strategic autonomy, open strategic autonomy. But behind these words, it means that we want to take control more and to find the right partners to do it. You mentioned high-speed train, and I know that you are mentioning, of course, one acquisition which didn't happen. But it's true that now we have a lot of new programs using new technologies, high-speed trains, supporting also hydrogen for bullet trains. So we have relaunched these new programs. By the way, we launch also zero aircraft emission for Europe. So thanks to the Green Deal and thanks also to the money that we, as the Commissions, grant to member states in the Next Generation EU, we have a lot of big programs now that member states will be able to fund, including in your directions. So standards, vision, money, and yes, in the first 20 companies in the world, we have a lot of big platforms. I'm not sure that the valuation of these companies will stay forever, but what is true is that we have more technologies that is related with the market value of our companies in Europe. That's probably a problem, I agree. But in terms of R&D, capacity of R&D, and innovation, I really want to tell you that we do not lag behind. But we need to work here also, the world, together.
Sure. When I hear these questions, I remember this article that I read recently. It was describing European leaders coming to the United States and saying, oh my gosh, we're being swamped by US technology. There is an authoritarian country that is exporting key technologies to third countries that are freighted with ideology. We need to close the technology gap with the United States, and how can we work together with the United States while also developing our indigenous technology. This article was from 1966, and it was talking about mainframe computers and IBM. So this issue, and of course the country, the authoritarian country, was the Soviet Union. So the question or the perception of inferiority on technology is not new in Europe. It has been around for decades. And as the Commissioner mentioned, this space is very dynamic. The two largest growing platforms, social media platforms, are from authoritarian countries, right? TikTok and Telegram. So if we start to anticipate trends rather than thinking about things with a, I would say, almost a 2015 mentality, where there was a great preponderance of, for example, US technology, I think that'll be key. And anticipating those trends is important for Europe right now as well. And I know that the Commissioner has spoken on this, because the next thing to happen is a big IoT revolution. And that is going to have a massive impact on Europe's innovation industrial base. There was a former German economic minister who liked to say, and I love the quote, I don't know if it works, but she said, you know, in the Internet of Things, the United States has the Internet and we have the things. Nice, but that means that Europe has to merge systems-based data processing technology into its manufacturing prowess, and that is going to be really determinant about Europe's future prosperity, because, as you mentioned, there was a major disruption in mobile telephone market. Nokia used to have a preponderant domination. The original adopters of cell phones in the 90s were the Italians. That's one of the reasons why they were such big standard setters in GSM. So anticipating those trends is really important. And then on technical standards, the US and Europe have both woken up to this as a field of geopolitics. There's an election next month at the ITU for the new Secretary General and Deputy Secretary General of the ITU. It's currently headed by a Chinese national. And the United States is running a candidate against a Russian candidate for the Secretary General position, and a European is running from Lithuania for the Deputy Secretary General. And both sides are supporting the other side. So this is a real-time example of an attempt for the US and Europe to regain some of the field in technical standard setting bodies.
Tenemos justo 6 minutos porque el comisario se tiene que ir a las 12, así que una...
We've got 6 minutes left because the commissioner has to leave at 12 o'clock on the dot. A very, very quick question. Please make them quick. Those kind of questions end up with a question mark. Not a comment, not a remark, a question.
Fraguas, for Mr. Breton. Following the question about whom is better to depend on for Europe regarding technology, the US, China, or nobody, Mr. Thierry Breton has generously shared his experience with the United States or the government of China when he demanded to free the European private operations that were blocked to the Minister of Trade of China. I think we understand better that reality. Our Secretary General of the United Nations keeps on telling us every day and the day after not to do business with those country rulers and owners of companies that systematically violate the human rights, do acts of crime against the environment, and acts of crime against humanity, like Putin. Mr. Breton, here is the question. Where is the line to stop those business for administrators and owners of big corporations like buying gas and oil or to provide technology for Putin's weapons? When are the administrators and owners of big corporations ready to shrink belts? Where is the line not to cross to defend our fundamental values recognized by law? Thank you very much.
Gracias. Había una pregunta por allí, una más, he visto.
Thank you. There's a question out there.
Aquí en la primera fila, por favor. También con interrogación al final.
No, my question is for Tyson. You refer to the high-level expert group of the Commission on Artificial Intelligence and rules, etc. I have been myself in the high-level expert group of the European Open Science Cloud, where we developed the architecture that has been founded for 10 years from CERN for Data Distribution and Computing Federation. And this we have given for free as open source to the US and to China. Yeah? So, of course, we didn't want Palantir in Gaia-X, right? Because those are working for the NSA, and this is perhaps a too dynamic environment for us, right? But in general, I think we can be very pragmatic in Europe. But from your perspective in the US, and this is the question, what we are missing, at least from a scientist, is that there is a layer of companies that adopt and exploit as a business what we do in the research centers, right? So this is, for me, the open question at this moment, if there are changes on those policies.
Amazing question, thank you. So maybe Tyson, short answer, and then...
Tyson, una respuesta breve.
Unfortunately,
Okay.
The first question, we had a lot of discussion in the Commission on this very question, and finally, Ursula von der Leyen mentioned this in our last State of the Union speech, that we had to work on a way to make sure that companies which are working outside of Europe work with suppliers, for example, which respect our own constraints, law, rules. And we did it. We did it with my colleague Didier Anders. It's done now. It is now in discussion. We finalized it. It is now in discussion with the Parliament and with the Member States. But in a nutshell, it means that everything that is important for us in terms of respect of rule of law, child working forces, and social conditions, everything should be taken into account with any suppliers of European companies and with any suppliers of the suppliers of the suppliers. In other words, all along the chain. So it's done now. I hope it will be passed by the European Parliament and by member states, but I'm confident, and you're right, it will change. We will continue, because we need also to continue to work on a global basis, but it's a new way to consider globalization. That's what I said at the beginning of this discussion. So that's, I think, pretty clear answer to your fair concern. Thank you.
Okay, so I think it's midday and you have to leave. Maybe we can follow up that question. I invite you to a coffee, because I also want to have the answer for that question. Let's have a big applause to Commissioner Breton, and to the rest of the panelists for being here and for this fantastic session. Gracias.
Bueno, el tema no se ha agotado.
We will continue discussing this issue.
Yeah.